The premise itself announces itself before the player has taken a single step. A corridor, a door at one end that does not open, an orange button at the other end that does. The game bills itself as a 20 to 30 minute experience about the relationship between player and game. And it means that literally. Its own listed genre is first person walking down a corridor game, followed by a preemptive dismissal of that obvious joke. Isn't that most games? Not like this one. The stated feature list is just as spare. A corridor, things found within it. The gameplay description resolves to a single sentence. You walk down a corridor. And that's it. Literally, it. With a caveat appended almost as an afterthought. Probably. Pressing the button the first time produces no ceremony. The game simply closes. Not a cutscene, not a fade to black with narration over it. The application terminates. And whatever the player expected to happen instead happens outside the game, in the act of relaunching it. Every subsequent press of the button repeats this closure, kicking the player back to the desktop and requiring them to open the program again, at which point a new variation on the corridor is waiting. The loop is the delivery mechanism. There's no menu screen offering continue or new game, because there is only one game, endlessly reopened, each time slightly wrong, in a new way. By the fifth relaunch, the corridor has learned to argue. On this attempt, the button has relocated behind the player's starting position, and the narrator, upon being found out, changes tactics entirely, instructing the player to press the button while simultaneously insisting they should not. The contradiction is the entire joke, delivered and then abandoned in the same breath. The narrator talking the player back out of the room before the logic can be examined too closely. A moment later, on the very next attempt, a corner appears at the far right end of the hallway that was not previously navigable, and inside it waits a figure the game referred to only as Cardboard Man, willing to be spoken to for the first time. Cardboard Man does not explain himself on introduction. He is simply present. A fixture the corridor has apparently been hiding in its geometry the whole time, unlocked not by solving anything, but by the number of times the player has already failed to leave. The seventh relaunch abandons subtlety for volume. The corridor fills with buttons, all of them non-functional, all of them identical to the real one in the far left corner, and the only way through is to press every single wrong button before the correct one will register. The official count sits at 156. Whether that number was arrived at for comic rhythm or simply because it was the amount that fit in the space is not something the corridor discloses. What it does disclose, through sheer repetition, is a kind of physical comedy translated into a walking simulator. The player as an actor forced through a slapstick routine that only they can see as slapstick, since there is no audience but the empty hallway and whatever is narrating it. 10 relaunches in, the corridor stops being a corridor. This attempt places the player on an island instead, disconnected from the hallway format entirely. And the correct response is not to explore the island, but to walk directly away from it, off whatever edge the level designer left open. Doing so leads to a room, and a second character, credited in the next achievement text as Dr. Cardboard, MD, a title that implies a medical practice built entirely out of cardboard, spoken to and then left behind like the corner dweller from before. The pattern by this point is legible even if its purpose is not. Every several attempts, the game offers an exit that isn't the button, a door out of the loop that isn't the door. Taking it doesn't end anything, it only adds another room to the growing catalog of places the corridor apparently contains but never advertises. The 12th relaunch changes genre outright. The level briefly becomes a first-person shooter, complete with a man positioned as an obvious target, the kind of setup that in any other game would be an invitation to fire. The correct action here is refusal, not shooting the man, and instead locating the actual button tucked behind a stack of crates in the far left corner, is what the corridor is asking for, disguised as an action game beat that punishes the instinct it just spent several seconds cultivating. The Steam Listings Mature Content notice mentions brief, fairly comedic violence, nothing graphic, alongside themes relating to mental health, that are described as present but not too explicit. A disclosure that reads almost like a warning label for this exact scene, and whatever quieter material sits elsewhere in the 30-odd relaunches. Attempt 28 is where the corridor stops disguising its request as a puzzle. The narrator states plainly that the player might consider listening to what is being said and stopping, and the correct response is to do nothing at all. Waiting causes the wall behind the starting position to dissolve, revealing a room where Cardboard Man is now seated on a couch, available to talk to you for the first time in a setting that resembles rest, rather than a waypoint. Every earlier encounter with the recurring figure happened in a transitional space, a corner, the far side of an island, a doctor's office reached by walking the wrong direction. The couch is the first time Cardboard Man is found somewhere that looks like it was built for staying rather than passing through. By the 34th attempt, the door the player has been standing next to since the very first relaunch finally opens. The narrator permits entry, and inside is a computer, with a set of orange buttons of its own. Smaller echoes of the one in the hallway waiting to be pressed before Cardboard Man can be spoken to one final time under this particular unlock. The achievement attached to this sequence is named for a fox that does not otherwise appear anywhere in the recorded material, a title without a visible referent, functioning less as a description of the scene than as a mood attached retroactively to it. The 35th attempt, or the 36th if the door was opened first, introduces an object described to as the save data cord. Unplugging it is an option. The correct path is not to, and instead to listen to the narrator through to the end and press the button only as instructed. Only on the following attempt, the one after that, does a note appear to be read, closing out the final achievement in the sequence. The corridor's last trick is patience, rather than trickery. Nothing hidden, nothing disguised as a shooter or an island, just an instruction to wait one more time before the note is legible at all. A 10th achievement sits above all of these, requiring nothing from the corridor directly. It unlocks only once every other achievement in the game has already been obtained, a meta condition that exists purely to certify the completion of the rest, named after the one mechanism the corridor conspicuously lacks, a switch that turns it off from the outside. Several of the relaunches do not stay contained to the game window. The corridor makes visible use of interface elements belonging to the Unreal Engine it was built in, letting pieces of the development tool itself surface inside what is otherwise presented as a finished, sealed experience. At points, it gives the impression of reaching past its own window entirely, appearing to interact with the player's desktop, though nothing it does causes lasting harm to the machine running it. One player recorded in the comments beneath the review of the game reported an actual blue screen occurring during a session, an event the reviewer is careful to attribute to an aging, already unstable computer rather than to the corridor itself, while noting how neatly the coincidence lined up with everything the game had just spent half an hour pretending to threaten. The recommendation printed alongside the game's own instructions is practical rather than atmospheric, because the loop involves repeatedly closing and reopening the application. Players are advised to switch Steam to offline mode for the duration, sparing anyone on their friends list from a barrage of relaunch notifications generated by a single setting. The suggestion doubles as an admission. The corridor's central mechanic, treated as a bit within the fiction, is also just a piece of software behaving the way repeatedly quitting and restarting software behaves, with all the real-world side effects that entails. Outside the game proper, a second piece of material exists under the corridor's name. A browser-based demo, presented as the game's trailer, does not simply preview footage but plays out as an extended, wholly separate sequence with content that appears nowhere in the purchased version. It sits adjacent to the main object rather than inside it, an artifact that borrows the corridor's premise, its button, its narrator, and constructs an entirely different set of jokes out of the same three pieces of furniture, unlockable to anyone regardless of whether they ever buy the thing it's ostensibly advertising. One detailed review lays out the corridor's core structural problem entirely. The game's whole premise is that it doesn't want to be played and resents the player's presence, but the player's stated goal is to press a button that turns it off, and the corridor's response to that goal is to make the button progressively harder to reach, which only works to keep the player playing longer. The same review praises the corridor's inventive use of the Unreal Engine it was built in, including moments where the engine's own interface surfaces inside the game and singles out a moment where the corridor seems to step outside its own boundaries entirely as something that got a genuine laugh, while criticizing the amateur, unpolished quality of the narrator's own voice work, credited to the game's solo developer rather than a hired performer. Its verdict lands on real affection for the ideas, paired with an admission that the underlying premise, a program angry at being restarted yet actively working to keep itself running, never fully squares with itself. A shorter, blunter account posted on Metacritic dismisses the whole thing as an unoriginal imitation, calling it frustrating and a poor copy of the Stanley Parable outright, wishing it managed even a fraction of that game's appeal. Against both of those sits a numbers-driven picture that's more forgiving than either. Across thousands of Steam reviews, 90+% register positive, a wide margin for a project this small, and this openly aware of its own contradictions. The listing's own awards section carries a single self-reported honor, a line from the developer noting that his mother said she was proud of him, which reads as a joke until it's noticed that nothing else occupies that space. No press quote, no festival nomination, just the one claim the corridor is willing to stand behind. What the corridor leaves behind after every button, every corner, every relocated door, is a structure built entirely out of its own refusal to end cleanly. Cardboard Man never explains what he is doing in the halls of a hallway that otherwise contains nothing but a button and a locked door. The note read on the final attempt is described only as something to be read, its contents unspecified in every account of the achievement that requires it. The corridor does not resolve into a statement about itself. It resolves into a list of rooms a player found by refusing, for just long enough, to do the one thing the space was built to make them do. If this one resonated, subscribe. New essays drop weekly, and you never know what's coming next. Share it with someone who'd get it, and leave a comment. I want to know which door this opened for you. Mystery Compendium. The archive is always open.